In our study together, we have looked at a number of examples where Jesus goes out of his way for just one person. He takes a perilous boat ride at night to meet a dangerous man who's locked up in a graveyard. He goes out of his way in the heat of the day to connect with a Samaritan woman at a well. And throughout the Gospels, we just find one example after another of stories like these. And oftentimes, what we find is that the very people Jesus went out of his way for are the same people that we tend to go out of our way to avoid. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus preaches a sermon known as the Sermon on the Mount. And there's a section of the sermon where Jesus gives a teaching that helps us understand just how he was incredibly intentional to do what he did, to show God's love to people one at a time. And I'll just tell you up front that what he teaches is pretty uncomfortable because his teaching contradicts the way that we naturally think. His teaching will challenge your innate perspective, and it will certainly challenge our cultural understanding of how we think of ourselves and how we treat others. So towards the beginning of the message, Jesus talks to his followers about their identity. And he says to them in Matthew chapter 5, he says, "You are the salt of the earth and the light of the world." And then what he does is he teaches his followers to treat people in a way that shines a light, to treat people in a way that adds some salt. Now, in those days, salt served a number of purposes. It was used to preserve food, but it was also used, as we would commonly use it today, to add flavor. And I think we could probably all agree on the fact that there are some things that just aren't any good without salt, right? Like a baked potato or corn on the cob. No offense, but if I sat down to eat with you and you eat your corn on the cob without salt, I'm out. Like, I don't trust you as a person. But the point of what Jesus is saying is that when we treat people in a way that he does, it adds salt. But when we don't treat people this way, it's like corn on the cob without salt. Nobody's interested in it. And if we could apply his one-at-a-time approach to the way we treat the people in our lives, Jesus says it will make God look good, and people will notice when we do it, and it will give people an appetite for him. To set up how Jesus applies this teaching, I want you to think about how you typically deal with difficult people. Now, you might have someone who immediately comes to your mind, a name, a face, but let me help you a little bit here. Maybe it is the bully at school, or a rude coworker, or an annoying neighbor, or an ungrateful child, or a selfish friend. But how do you respond when someone hurts you, or betrays you, rejects you, ridicules you, takes advantage of you, gossips about you? And Jesus begins this teaching by saying, "You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." Yeah, I've heard that, and I kind of like it, right? This idea that you hit me, I'll hit you back, and you yell at me, I'll yell back. I'm not gonna raise my voice, but if you raise your voice, I'm gonna raise my voice back. You honk at me, I'll honk back. Like, before your honk is even done honking, I've already started to honk. I'm comfortable with that approach, this eye for an eye approach to life. But Jesus begins by saying, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye. And then he gives a new standard. He says, but I tell you, do not resist an evil person. And Jesus had a way of challenging people by making a broad statement like that. Don't resist an evil person. But then he gets specific in a way that makes everyone more uncomfortable. And after saying, don't resist an evil person, he gives 4 different scenarios to help paint a picture of what that looks like. What I want to do is draw your attention to just one of the scenarios that Jesus gives. Jesus says, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Okay, so here's the problem I have with this. It's the word forces. Honestly, if someone asks me, respectfully and kindly to go 1 mile, okay, I'll do that. I don't really feel like it, maybe, but chances are I still need to get my steps in for the day, so I'll go with you 1 mile if you ask me. But the minute I feel forced and my pride kicks in, I get sensitive and angry because force implies that someone is trying to control me. This teaching is in reference to a law back then that a Roman soldier could force civilians into acts of service, but there were limitations. So, as an example, a Roman soldier could force a Jew to carry his pack for 1 mile, but not any further. The Jewish person didn't have an option about carrying it 1 mile, but he didn't have to carry it any further than that. They couldn't be forced to go the 2nd mile. So, just for context here, the Roman soldiers were the enemy and they treated the Jewish people like dogs. Can we just imagine a scenario? A Jewish man is coming home from work. He's tired and he's hungry and he just wants to get home for a little bit of sports center before going to bed. And he sees a soldier on the side of the road. It's the last thing he needs. The soldier throws his pack onto the ground in front of the man's feet, says something like, "Be a good dog and carry this for me." Now the Jewish man is angry. He's upset every step of the way. And as soon as he hits the mile mark, he drops the pack and he marches home. What happens when he gets home? Well, he's frustrated and he's angry and he slams the door and he yells at his wife. He's short with the kids. He kicks the dogs and he spends the rest of the evening in his home. But what if he got to the end of the 1st mile and said to the Roman soldier, "Hey, you know what? I don't mind going a 2nd mile if it would help you out." It might feel like he's giving up power, but if you think about it, isn't he taking some control back? Because no one's making him do it, he's choosing it. He might have come home a little later than he planned, but he walks in the door with some dignity. My guess is the Roman soldier wouldn't have known what to say in that moment. I'm sure he would have told his other soldier buddies about it. Like, "You wouldn't believe what happened to me today. I made this Jew carry my pack 1 mile, and he voluntarily carried it too." The point is, people would have noticed. A few years ago, I was visiting with a member of our church who owns a local business. There had recently been an incident where a young man came into a store and stole something that was worth a couple $100. The owner was, of course, upset and angry when he realized what had happened. And when he reviewed the security cameras, he was able to get a license plate number, and soon he had a name, and we'll call him Jake. And he called the police with Jake's name and picture, and the police took a report. But what happened next was really up to, in large part, the store owner. He considered his options. I mean, he could take the eye for an eye approach. He could make Jake pay for what he had done. Jake was facing like a $1,000 fine and a year in jail. But the store owner decided he didn't want to ruin this young man's life, so he considered the second option. After Jake returned the item, he could just sit him down and yell at him and take out his anger. That's honestly what he wanted to do. That's what felt right. But the store owner was a follower of Jesus, and he decided on option number 3. And so he took time to pray for Jake and ask God what he should do. And that night he left Jake a message and asked him to come by the store. And Jake came and apologized. And the store owner told Jake, "I forgive you. I care about you. I won't press charges. The only thing I'm going to ask is for you to come to church with me." And Jake agreed, and he came to our church the next weekend, and our church was able to help Jake get connected to an inpatient treatment center for his addiction, where he started that path down the road to recovery. And sometime later, Jake's sister stopped by the store and introduced herself to the store owner, and she told the store owner that she and her husband would often come to our church and had often invited Jake and their parents, but they'd never shown any interest. But recently, they had all started coming together. Now, what changed? The store owner put some salt on it. Now, I get it. Like, what he did doesn't appeal to our sense of justice. What he did feels unnatural. What he did was certainly unnecessary. But He set aside his rights, he humbled himself, and he went the extra mile. And Jesus teaches his followers to have this extra mile mentality with one person at a time. Even when that person is the person who is an enemy making your life miserable. Well, what would it look like to do that for you today? I would just encourage you to try it. If someone insults you, say something nice to them. If your spouse criticizes you, compliment them. If someone blames you, bless them. If your server is short with you, give a more generous tip than you would normally give. If the boss is especially grumpy or demanding, pray for her and drop a note of encouragement. You don't think they'd notice that? They would notice. Go the second mile. Listen, it'll bless your life. It will make a difference in this world, and you will make God look good.